Well, a good afternoon, Dudu. Indeed, we are outside the Good Hope Chamber here at Parliament. The Good Hope Chamber is within the parliamentary precinct. It's the building behind me right there. It's one of the older buildings within the parliamentary precinct. It's a chamber that has been used over the years by Parliament for some of the sittings that were not held in the National Assembly or the old Assembly chamber. It's been one of those spare venues, but following the fire that gutted the National Assembly chamber and the old Assembly chamber, it has now become the venue where Parliament has decided that sittings of the National Assembly will continue from, because the Speaker of the National Assembly, each time we spoke to her after the fire, was insistent that the work of Parliament will continue. Parliament will find alternative venues to continue with its business. But to talk to us a bit more about this venue is the spokesperson for Parliament, Mloto Mtapo. Mloto, talk us through the history of this building. It's not a new chamber altogether, it's an old building. What was it used for before the 1994 Parliament?
Well, this is one of the oldest buildings in what we call today the precincts of Parliament, because it has not always been part of the precincts of Parliament. It is consistent. Its history is consistent with some of the buildings within the precincts of Parliament, which were not necessarily, commissioned by Parliament itself or the state, but they were privately owned and later purchased by the state as, part of the buildings of the precincts of Parliament. So it's one of the oldest. It's actually older than the actual building that was associated from the scratch, from the start with Parliament, which is the National Council of Provinces. So this Good Hope Chamber, originally in 1854, between 1854 to 1885, was used as the sittings of the Cape Legislative Assembly, which was the Parliament of the colonial era. So while the National Council of Provinces, what we call the National Council of Provinces, was being created, was being built. So with the conclusion of the building of the NCOP, what was then called the Senate, so the Cape Legislative Assembly moved to that building in 1885. So from the early 1900s, this was then serving as the banquet or dinner place of the Freemasons, who are the original owners of this building.
We understand, Mloto, that this building was also affected by fire, just like the National Assembly and the old Assembly chamber were now affected. But how did it become restored and become used again?
Well, by the time it was affected by fire, it was not owned by Parliament or the state. So it was at a time that it had now moved from being a site or the venue of the Cape Legislative Assembly, and it was serving as the dinner place or a banquet place for the Freemasons. So it was then that it caught fire, but it was later rebuilt. And then after it was rebuilt, it was then purchased by the state, I think in 1816. And then after the state purchased it around the 1920s, this new facade that you see in some sort of the old Cape Revival architecture was created. So from 1994, this building then served as one of the committee rooms of Parliament, where members will sit, and also it houses some of the offices of members of Parliament. And that is where also the executive, the cabinet, when it is in Cape Town, has been holding its meetings.
We understand now that the National Assembly chamber will have its sittings here. Talk us through the capacity of this venue, because it is significantly smaller than the previous building of the National Assembly chamber, which has now been gutted by fire.
Yes. This, with the decision of political parties and the presiding officers that now this will become the alternative venue for the sittings of the National Assembly, it means that there is a continuation of the hybrid arrangement of the sittings of the National Assembly that we have had for the past 2 years. So the venue itself is smaller than the National Assembly. it can only accommodate about 170 persons. But with, of course, the importance of observing the social distancing as well as the COVID protocols, we are only going to allow about 70 persons in this. So the rest of the members of parliament will be joining virtually.
We understand that the State of the Nation address will be taking place at the City Hall here in Cape Town. Following from there, which sittings will take place here?
Well, the joint sitting of the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces, which is the State of the Nation address, of course, will be taking place at the City Council, at the City Hall. So will be the debate that will follow, as well as the reply by the President. So that will be the end of the use of the City Hall for now. And then everything now, in terms of the sittings of the National Assembly, will move to this particular chamber. It means that beginning with the budget speech and all the other subsequent sittings of the National Assembly will be taking place here.
Mloto, thank you so much for talking to us. That's Mloto Mutapo, who is the spokesperson for Parliament, giving us an update on the developments here at Parliament around finding alternative venues for Parliament to continue with its work. The Good Hope Chamber right behind us has been chosen as the venue for Parliament to continue its work of the National Assembly Chamber until the buildings that were gutted by fire are restored. We don't know how long that will take. The last time we spoke to the Speaker of the National Assembly, Newzroom Afrika, had mentioned that it may take about 2 years or so. They don't know clearly until the forensic investigation is done, engineers look into the building, and decisions are later made. So until then, this will be the venue for sittings of the National Assembly.